PBS interviewed the head of Al-Qaeda, and they're really moving in this direction that once they clean up Al-Qaeda's image enough they will start being open about the fact that they're actually sending them weapons. But they are. It's already happening. The weapons are coming through Turkey, which is NATO, across the border in Syria. At the end of the day, the most important thing for the US is to keep Idlib province under Al-Qaeda control.
Hi everyone. Before we start, I want to take a minute to talk about my next book. You may have heard about the story of GameStop in January or February and thought it was all over. You're sadly mistaken. Unfolding online has been a clash between the corrupt practices of Wall Street and the hive mind of the internet. It's a hot, raging information war pitting retail investors against financial giants swimming in corruption and fraud. The trailer is at the end of this podcast, but if you want to help crowdfund the book or just find out more, you can sign up to my mailing list to get access to a preview of chapter 1 or go to whenmoon.com to read more about the book. The first 200 people to pre-order the book will get a free pack of To the Moon crayons with their book. I just want to make a quick mention of our sponsors. Namecheap are one of the cheapest places on the internet to get a domain name for your next website. I've used Namecheap for all the sites I've ever purchased and have found it really easy to use. Spreaker are a rapidly growing platform for podcast recording, publishing, and monetization, with pricing plans as low as $7 per month. A cheap way to host your podcast and start earning from your back catalogue of shows. Finally, ExpressVPN is the internet's most trusted VPN. Protect your privacy and watch and view content that is location locked. You could even try watching Netflix from a different country. And right now, they're offering 35% off 12 months of ExpressVPN. Please use the links in the description below if you want to support the show. Anyway, here's the podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Chatter. Today I'm talking to Maram Susli, who is a Syrian Australian YouTube content creator and also known as PartisanGirl on Twitter. Maram, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, no problem. So you were telling me before we started and yesterday that you've just broken a piece on Twitter censorship. Do you want to tell me a little bit about that?
Well, it's yet to be published. Hopefully it'll be published in about a day or two. I essentially have been censored, or my Twitter account is currently locked because of a tweet that I don't believe broke the terms and conditions. The content of my tweet was that that there's a genocide going on against Palestinians. But by comparison, the US is constantly telling us about a Uyghur genocide happening in China, but I've seen actual evidence of a genocide against Palestinians, whereas I've not seen evidence for a genocide against Uyghurs in China. And yet, we don't really talk about that. And the truth shall set you free. That is essentially the content of my tweet, was to compare what's going on in Palestine, which I think is legitimately a genocide, versus what the US is telling us is happening, that China is committing, and why one is being focused on and the other is ignored. So Twitter, told me I have to delete this because it breaks TOS, and if I were to delete it, I will get 12 hours only, like a 12-hour ban. And then I can have my Twitter account back. But instead of doing that, I thought, I'm not going to accept this. I'm going to take a stand. So I requested for the tweet to appeal, thinking that if a human being were to see this, they'd realize this is like my right of an opinion. I'm not harassing anyone as claimed on Twitter. But what I got back from them was this breaches our denial of violent events content. So they have a rule against denying violent events. So, but I've not seen anyone from the Israelis or the Zionist lobby get banned for denying the genocide against Palestinians. But if you deny, sorry, my lights just turned off. I'll just turn it back on. But if you deny like what, or even if you question something that's coming from the State Department, for which like no international body has ruled that there's any kind of genocide happening against Uyghurs in China, then suddenly now you're questioning the narrative of the State Department, and hence you must be banned.
That's interesting that you say that there's been no one has confirmed or has like declared officially that there's a genocide. The UK government definitely said something, and I spoke to, I don't want to get bogged down in this bit, but I spoke to Dr. Erkin Siddiq, who's a scientist at NASA, and he's from Xinjiang, and he has like been back there personally, and now can't go back out of fear of persecution. So, I mean, he seemed pretty genuine when he was talking to me. So I just want to make sure we don't like say that it's definitely not happening, because but the what you're saying about the double standards is
correct. Correct, because a genocide is where you don't want, and you will exterminate an entire ethnic group because they you don't want them to live in this area. With Palestinians, because they're not Jewish, the Zionists do not want them to exist in the Levant, basically. And so that's why they're pushing them out of their homes, they're killing them, they're putting them in jail. They're not giving citizenship, so they're considered non-people. We've seen videos of violence, we've seen the evidence. By comparison, there's no such equivalent happening in Xinjiang province that I've seen. You can say that you can't say that there's prison camp, you can say that maybe their rights are being violated, but to call it a genocide, that is a completely different and legal issue. And that's why I think that what the US has done is try to redefine the word genocide, because there isn't like a mass violence event, basically, like the Nakba for Palestinians, where they were actually like ethnically cleansed and made to death march across the desert to Jordan. That hasn't happened in Xinjiang. So I'm just trying to point out that there is a hypocrisy here. Not to say that like individual rights, that's a different topic. But even the CFR and the Economist recently said, is genocide really the right word to use for Xinjiang? So the Economist and the CFR can make such comments, but I can't tweet, comparing what's happening to Palestinians to what's happening in Xinjiang province, because I think this has really got nothing to do with the Uyghurs or Xinjiang province. I think that this is the Zionist lobby trying to exploit the rules of Twitter to silence me because I said there was a Palestinian genocide. And that's really the main issue here.
Yeah, it's an awful situation. I guess the other thing is that there's a lot more video footage and photographs and things that are coming out of Palestine compared to China's very shuttered and closed off. Like you can't really get near any of these places to see what's actually happening. Whereas the violence going on in Israel and Palestine is very well documented. It's on maybe the spin is not accurate the way it's being presented in the press, but there's at least we at least have lots of footage and evidence of things happening there, especially from people on the ground. So it's a lot more clear cut, I think.
I think with the movement of Palestinians, like if you're a Palestinian in the West Bank, you have to have special permission from Israel to move to another town in your own region. And there's no way you'll ever go to the beach, and you can't move to Gaza. And people in Gaza can't move to the West Bank. And sometimes like people can't even leave their villages. So in that sense, the fact that we have the internet has really helped for these images and things to occur. But in terms of people being able to enter and document, that's still difficult, I think, for international groups to go into Palestine. They would have to have some kind of, lie about their intentions in order to go. And I think that even still, like what we're seeing and the spin on it is heavily controlled by the Zionist lobby. So and the fact that my tweet got censored, but someone denying the Palestinian genocide would not get censored for denial of a violent event, that just goes to highlight the amount of control that the Zionist has over the discourse on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, it also shows how much Twitter sort of selectively apply their terms of service, and like Twitter aren't the only one that are guilty of it. I mean, I've seen posts that you've made talking about Facebook either throttling or censoring your posts about Israel. Do you want to give a little more detail on that, and like why you think what Facebook's motivation is, if it's the same or something a little different?
Actually, that's interesting that this censorship isn't just happening on one of my platforms. It's happening across multiple platforms. And I think that shows that I'm being targeted specifically. And in both cases, the tweets or the comments that were censored were specifically about Israel and its extermination of Palestinians. So one doesn't have to be a genius to conclude that this is a targeted censorship attempt by the Zionist lobby. Now, with Facebook, it's interesting because I actually have a bunch of contacts of people inside Facebook that are specifically, like, their job is to make sure that political discourse is equal. And I emailed these individuals telling them, like, this is unfair, it's censorship, because we have a right to say what the tweet that I wrote was that Israel is the Jewish ISIS. And that is my opinion. It is the Jewish version of ISIS. It is the Jewish state in the Levant. And that is my experience as someone from the Levant whose own people have been exterminated by both ISIS and Israel. I mean, the Golan Heights was, all Syrian, and now it's being taken over by Israel. So the people that are from the Golan, they can't go back to their homes, they can't go back to their villages. That's the very definition of ethnic cleansing. So in our experience, there's very little difference between Israel and ISIS. Both of these people have tried to exterminate us based on religion, what they think that God owes them our land. So I think that that is the point that I was making, and that's now not allowed by Facebook. No explanation given. I even emailed these individuals that work inside Facebook, no response. So they basically, I think the message here is they don't want to step on the wrong toes, and that those toes are probably related to the ADL, probably related to the Zionist lobby.
Why is it that you think the Zionist lobby and the pro-Israeli lobby has so much power? Well,
this really goes back to that's a very complicated question. I think that there's many facets to this. So there's special interest groups that, for specifically in the United States, there's these special interest groups that will give money to certain politicians if they are pro-Israel. And there's also a barrier to entry. I think specifically former Senator Cynthia McKinney, who made news recently for one of her tweets. And I kind of also made news because I defended her right to free speech because they tried to censor her for it, the Israeli lobby, that she said that when she was trying to be a senator in the United States, in order to get donations, they tried to make her sign a document that said that she believes in the right for Israel to exist in Palestine. So she kind of shone a light on the fact that this is the one topic you can be a Democrat, you can be a Republican, you can have conservative values, but you, at the very least, you have to believe in Israel's right to exist. And that is the one thing that all these American politicians share across the board. Money is a big part of it. I think Ilhan Omar said it's all about the Benjamins. They want donors, like these politicians, money to their campaign. And also there's bullying. I mean, if you do come out and say, I don't believe that Israel has a right to exist, then you will be deemed an anti-Semite, just like Jeremy Corbyn. Even though he didn't even say that much, the media will come out against you. And the influence in the media, that also is from money, like who establishes these companies. And for example, Ezra Levant, he's got money, he's got Rebel Media, he builds his content, and he will hire you if you, oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, don't worry.
My last sentence.
Yeah, where were we?
Ezra Levant.
Ezra Levant. Yeah.
Although that was just an example. So, yeah, media is like Ezra Levant, Rebel News. He has money, he establishes a platform, and he'll only hire people that push the line. And we know that there's many journalists in CNN and BBC that were fired for taking a pro-Israel stance. So there's also this element of fear that they, promote, that if you don't. I think it's very, very, like, people will look at the media and they'll say, but they're acknowledging that Palestinians are being treated unfairly. And I think that recently it's become just so difficult to deny what's happening that it would be embarrassing to try. But the word apartheid is now being used by many people, but the word genocide is something that's still being deemed dangerous and that we're not allowed to speak about.
I mean, I guess I didn't used to think that the attitudes of like the Israeli people were as strong as they seem to be, at least. I remember watching that video that Abby Martin had made when she was in, I think she was in Tel Aviv maybe, and she was just interviewing people on the street, and just the language and the way they were talking about the Palestinian people was a really terrifying, like, I don't know, they just othering of like a group of people as if they deserved to like die or at least like be thrown from their land. And the thing that honestly confuses me, and I don't know, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, is that, for example, you get someone like Barry Weiss, who is normally quite on the side of like social justice warrior sorts of people, right? The very like politically correct sort of lobby. And to them, generally, it seems to me that the attitude is always like, speak your truth, and whatever you say and you've experienced, that's like the way the world is. And then when you say, it's my experience having lived in parts of Palestine and like witnessing the violence, the discrimination, the genocide as you've described it firsthand, and you say, look, that's what I have seen, and they can just write you off as if just because like they don't like what your truth is, all of a sudden it doesn't matter. And I've never quite got how they can like justify that in their minds.
There's this line that is drawn in the sand, like it's the one rule that you can't say. And it's funny because I'm from Syria, okay? I'm from the Levant. My parents, when they were teenagers, they were there under the Israeli bombs in 1973. If anyone has a right to speak their truth about Israel, at the very least, someone from the Levant can. And in my experience, they have been just as bad as ISIS. That's my truth. But I'm not allowed to say that. I'm not allowed to say, hey, we're being exterminated. No, that would be racist of me. That would be anti-Semitic. And it is a complete hypocrisy. How do individuals like Barry Wise, justify this? I think even Rachel Maddow will never really talk about the plight of Palestinians, even though she's seen as this liberal. What people need to understand is that at the very, very beginning, when Israel was created in 1948, or even before that, let's go back to before World War II, like in 1920, when the first boatloads of illegal Jewish immigrants were arriving from Russia. They wanted to what they were trying to sell this Jewish state as is a communist utopia. That's why the concept of kibbutz comes from. And, at the time, a lot of the biggest thinkers and communists and writers were Jewish. So that's the way it was sold to the world. Like, this is going to be a communist utopia, and it's not going to be racist, and it's going to be egalitarian. But we're going to have to push out all of these Arabs. But don't worry, because they're not human. They're not European like us. And you and me, we're European. But these guys, they're from the Middle East. And therefore, we can just say that this land has no people in it. We are a people without a land. And here is a land without a people, essentially. So that is what has been Israel since its inception. Was sold to the world as this a liberal state. And I think that a lot of these liberal Zionists, what we call them, want to retain that image from what it is really now, which we all know that it is an ethno state. Well, that's what they try to claim to be, even though there's some disagreement as to whether that's true, because obviously Jewish is maybe an ethnicity, but it's not a race, because they're coming from all over the world. So in my view, it's more like a religious state than anything. So the point is that that's the mentality that they come from. And so that's where they draw the line. They draw the line on Israel. And there's an element of gatekeeping as well. It's they will just control the discourse on the left. And there are lines that you can't cross. And we saw what happened to Jeremy Corbyn when he tried to cross them.
Yeah, I mean, I still will never understand how the most prominent anti-racist campaigner in Britain in the last 40 years was successfully smeared as an anti-Semite. It still stuns me. I don't think you could pick someone like less concerned about where someone was from. But when I'm looking at some of the stuff that happens in Israel and Palestine and in the conflict, is like sometimes I'm looking at it and I can't pretend to understand the really specific ins and outs of it. It's an incredibly complex topic, and one of my friends likes to poke fun at anyone who ever starts complaining about the conflict, because he's like, "How do you solve it then? Come on, you know so much. Please tell me how you solve it." He likes to shoot down people trying to, he likes to shoot. Yeah. Okay.
Tell your friend,
please.
Just tell him, make all Palestinians, whether they be Jewish or not Jewish, equal citizens in one state. You can call it Israel or you can call it Palestine. And that's it. Problem solved.
Okay. So you're an advocate of a one-state solution.
Correct. It's the most logical thing, because at this point, there's 15% of Israel's population are Palestinian, and there is a large and growing number of illegal Jewish settlers living on Palestinian land. And what Israel's policy at the moment is to slowly exterminate Palestinians. And they've had some varying success, right? But the thing is that Palestinians are not going to go down without a fight. And they're a tenacious people, because I come from the Levant and we've been around for 10,000 years. Jerusalem was built by Canaanites from which Palestinians descend. So we're not really going to go anywhere. So the conflict's just going to keep going unless everyone agrees that it doesn't matter if you're Jewish or Christian or Muslim. As long as you live on this land, you can be equal and you can travel equally. At this current juncture, there are Palestinians that are stateless, which means they don't even have a passport. So imagine living your life like that and being seen as persona non grata. You basically don't exist as a human being and you have no rights. So I don't believe in a two-state solution, because they're already too mixed up. And in any sense, there are people in all over the world who are Palestinian, who come from Haifa, who were pushed out of their homes. And they come from those villages, and they've historically come from those villages. And we know in the United Nations that refugees have an inalienable right of return. Mm-hmm. So justice says that a one-state solution is what's the only viable solution. But the problem is that the people who are most against that are actually the liberal Zionists. So you have the liberal Zionists' most important thing is to keep the idea of the possibility of the two-state solution viable and alive. But the right-wing Zionists want a one-state solution, but they don't want anyone that isn't a Jew in it. So those are the two positions you can have. And a one-state solution where everyone's equal is something that is deemed of the utmost danger, even though it's the most just.
That's interesting. I have not actually, I think, heard anyone even advocating for that before. The thing that springs to my mind, at least anyway, is coming from Northern Ireland. So I don't know how much you know about Northern Ireland. So we had so we had a 30, 40 year civil war, basically, where there was a lot of people throwing petrol bombs and blowing each other up about whether we were British or Irish. It was a very, it was a very identity driven conflict, to put it in a nutshell. There's obviously more complex parts of it, but
yes.
So one of the fears that nationalists or Republicans, Catholics, however you want to put it, the people who believed they were Irish had, was that any government that was put in place that tried to encapsulate both sides of the community would then be dominated by, in our case, it would have been the Protestant majority, and that they would have subjugated the nationalist, Republican, Catholic sort of portion of the population, because that's what had happened for the first 50 or so years of the Northern Irish state. And it's been a very, very long and violent road to get us to a point where everyone can peacefully coexist. And it feels like the Israel-Palestine conflict is 20 to 100 times more explosive and more violent. There's been, we were never firing, we were never flying jets over the other side of Belfast and dropping bombs, leveling whole buildings. There was never, people's homes were rarely put at risk, essentially. We had some awful bombings, but it wasn't anywhere near the scale of what's sort of been happening, even in just the last 18 months in Gaza, in the West Bank. And I'm skeptical that that's even a possibility, basically, as a one-state solution. Do you want to convince me?
Well, the only alternative is genocide. So we really can't. There is no two-state solution. Nobody, the Israelis don't want it. The Palestinians don't want it. The Palestinians want a one-state solution where everyone's equal. The Israelis want a one-state solution where they exterminate all Palestinians. The only people that are hallucinating of a two-state solution are the liberal Zionists. And I think the last few years under Netanyahu has completely pushed them to the point where even the people who would advocate for a two-state solution, like Norman Finkelstein, for example, even he now is actually, I was wrong. Maybe the one-state solution is the only solution. So the thing is that with the Irish situation, there are similarities to draw, and I've spoken to a lot of Irish people about this, in fact, between the situation in Palestine and the situation in Ireland. But there are also some huge differences. For example, under no scenario did you not possess British citizenship, citizenship to a state.
Mm-hmm.
Palestinians don't have citizenship to a state. They are stateless, and therefore they have no rights as like they're not citizens. They have no rights. The other thing is that with Britain and the Irish, there was some ethnic cleansing, especially a few hundred years ago. But the UK and Ireland border each other, so it's a border dispute. Whereas in the case of Israel or the Jewish state, the people came from all over the world because of a religion. And therefore, it is more similar to ISIS because they also came from all over the world because of a religion told them that that land belongs to them and no one else. And I think that religious element to it, a lot of these illegal Jewish settlers, you'll hear them say it. They'll say God gave me the right to this land. Yes, I am here to exterminate these Palestinians. And because of that religious fervor, unfortunately, I know there was an element of the Catholic and the Protestant thing in Ireland, but did the Protestants say that God gave me the right to this land and therefore I have the right to kill you? I don't think it went that far. There was some, schism in who is going to be in power and is it going to benefit one group or the other. But there wasn't we need to just kill everyone kind of thing as the Zionists have with Palestinians. So the fact that they come from all over the world means that they all have passports to another country. So a lot of the Jewish Americans that live in Israel, like the one that he's if I don't steal it, someone else is going to steal it. Jacob. He has a passport. He was just 1 year ago, he was living in New York. So it's not that it's he was there all his life and he's been living there for 800 years like a Protestant in Northern Ireland. No, it's he came here yesterday and he took over someone's house. He's from America. And that's happening constantly. That's the difference between Ireland and Northern Ireland and Palestine. Every year there's a new boatload of immigrants from all over the world that have no history on that land except for the fact that they happen to be a certain religion and they're taking over land and space that was historically Palestinian. And your situation has somewhat resolved because there was a peace treaty. The situation in Palestine, the Oslo Accords, was the attempted peace treaty. What happened? The Israeli president that signed that was assassinated by Israelis, and Arafat was poisoned by Israelis, and Clinton got Monica Lewinsky, which Monica Lewinsky was, by the way, interestingly linked to the Mossad. So
no way.
I know that's a conspiracy, but please investigate it yourself. There's a book about it called Gideon Spies. Very, very interesting book. So I think that the whole Oslo Accord thing, it just doesn't work in this situation. It's not the same. We really need, there are people who are advocating for a one-state solution, and those are the people that we need to put our weight behind. Because it's the two-state solution is just not going to happen. Besides, look at the way that things are divided. At the very start, when the UN was drawing the lines of what Israel and Palestine are going to be, they created this Harlequin outfit pattern. They took all of the water territory, the most fertile land, and they gave it to the Jewish population. And then it's discontiguous. I mean, Gaza is over here and the West Bank's over there. It's discontiguous. And there's still a population of Palestinians inside, the Levant proper, Palestine, the west side where the water is. It was designed to fail, is what I'm trying to say. It's not like North and South. It's intermeshed. And that is just, the people have family. The thing is that people still have family on the other side. So it's the only solution is a one-state solution, and it's gonna happen regardless. And that's the thing that, this is my way of convincing you. The liberal Zionists are afraid that the right-wing Zionists are going to try to take over all of Palestine by, saying the West Bank is now part of Israel, like Netanyahu tried to do. But they're going to fail to get rid of Palestinians. And therefore, they're going to have to give Palestinians citizenship. And because of demographics alone, the idea of a Jewish state will no longer exist. That is the fear of the liberal Zionists. And that is why it's so important for them for the two-state solution to be maintained as an illusion, because then nobody will say, actually, can you just give Palestinians citizenship? That's the statement that they're afraid of the most, I think.
Okay. Yeah, I just checked out what you said about Monica Lewinsky, actually, just briefly, and it says, in this book, The Secret History of Mossad, that the author claims that 8 months before Kenneth Starr had ever heard of Monica Lewinsky, the Israelis had about 30 hours of recorded tapes of President Bill Clinton talking intimately with her. It is also written that Jerusalem was keeping these tapes either for blackmail or to defend its mole in the White House, whose code name was Mega. That's stunning. I mean, I next week I'm interviewing Kirby Summers, who's just released a book about Ghislaine Maxwell, and she's written quite extensively about Epstein as well, who were obviously almost definitely Mossad linked or Mossad agents. So that's interesting and terrifying at the same time, isn't it? The power of the Israeli state is, I mean, and and then they just had that Operation Pegasus thing revealed, where they were like tapping thousands of journalists' phones. That feels like if that was Russia or China or Venezuela or like any of like the big, I don't know, you can call them enemies, like geopolitical rivals, whatever. But like if any of them were doing that, we'd be like, hang on, what the fuck? Like, calm down. Like, we need to do something about this. And this
interference. That's what
Yeah, exactly. It would be, you'd be having 3 years of investigations that seems to have brought nothing, which is still stunning to me, because I feel like there was probably stuff you could have prosecuted people for. I don't know how egregious it was is up for debate, but I'm still stunned that they didn't get more convictions out of something they seemed so certain about. And yet there seems to be no cries for like international sanctions, or I don't know. I guess it kind of just speaks to the power of the Israeli state that no one's willing to challenge them for whatever reason. I don't know.
Well, at least the Americans, like, how many times has Israel been caught spying on Americans? How many times have the Americans acted on it? I mean, here in Australia, I'll tell you a story, since I'm from Australia. Well, I live here, originally born in Syria, but the Israelis were discovered stealing Australian passports and using them to go to the United Arab Emirates and assassinate people. So essentially they were putting Australian citizens at risk by doing this. And the Australian intelligence community found out through a Israeli double agent, like an Australian Israeli who told them what was happening. So they asked for them to stop, but they refused to stop. They kept doing it. And eventually the prime minister went to the United Nations and made a formal complaint about them. And the fallout of this is the Israeli double agent was thrown into jail and then killed, and by the Israelis. And the Australian Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, and this is in his book, said that the head of the Zionist lobby here in Australia threatened him that he was going to be removed and replaced by Julia Gillard, which was exactly what happened. Like a few months later, Julia Gillard did an internal coup and took over the leadership. And he was like one of the most popular prime ministers here. And he wasn't even like against the state of Israel. He was for a two-state solution. But Julia Gillard, like one of the first things she did was she visited Israel on a trip. And ever since then, there's been political upheaval in Australia. I don't know if you've noticed that we're always having internal coups and the prime minister is constantly changing. I mean, it was because of that. It was because Kevin Rudd complained that Israel was stealing Australian passports and assassinating people with them. And that's just not allowed, I guess. This is from his own words, by the way.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that was the reason for the constant chopping and changing there for the last few years of prime ministers.
Yeah. I think it set the precedent, but that was the first time that it actually happened.
Okay.
Yes. And
yeah, I mean, like, what is your sense on why no one will challenge Israel on this properly? Because, I mean, just looking at it from the outside, from my vaguely ignorant understanding of it, is like it looks like Israel committing war crimes, like, and you know, the violent, I mean, like the violent expansion of territory. Just like anytime I hear anything, like, and people are always like, oh, you know, Hamas are just as bad, and I'm sure Hamas have done some fucked up shit as well. But I don't know. It just feels like the difference in firepower, or just the damage being leveled, or the way, like, if you look at people in parts of Israel, and then you look at like the state of Palestine, like they don't really compare. Like there's people living in like as prisoners in their own, you know, villages, and I heard stories of the crutches being taken away from people who'd been injured by bomb blasts in case they used the crutches as weapons. And like that doesn't feel like it's a both sides argument to me, at least anyway. Like, why do you think that no one is willing to challenge Israel on this? Because like, it has to get real sinister, I think, fear. But fear of what?
I'm being censored on all platforms, and like it can have real world consequences for you. You could be like Jeremy Corbyn, become like labeled an anti-Semite. People are afraid that it'll affect their work. You know, I think fear is what drives people to silence about these crimes. And the statement that, and also there's a lot of disinformation. I mean, these people are the masters of disinformation. They're literally like, you know, when we talk about genocide, we think of it as, oh, you know, the Native Americans, they were genocided. That's just something that happened a long time ago when people were not as sophisticated, or they were just racist. And if you were alive at that time, you'd surely make a stand. But you are alive at this time. It's something that's happening now. It's kind of like saying, oh, the Comanches were just as bad. That's what that's what they mean when they say Hamas is just as bad. But Hamas is a reaction to the creation of a Jewish state. That's like it's almost as though saying that the groups that fought ISIS in Syria were just as bad, because they were employing violence against these poor Muslims who have been discriminated against by Europeans, and they just want to create their own state because you must sympathize with them for that. Like the same narratives can be applied to ISIS. Is what I'm trying to say. I'm not trying to say ISIS is good. That's Siri. No, what I'm trying to say is that the same narratives can be applied to ISIS, and as such, it actually doesn't make any sense. So ISIS aren't good; they're bad, and fighting them is therefore good. So I don't agree that Hamas can be seen as equal. I think like people have a right to defend themselves, and their territory is being eroded. We know that there is an Israel, but there is no like Palestine at the moment. And at the same time, Israel has never declared its borders, which means that it has its eyes on expansion, just like ISIS. And that is essentially the problem. Like, you can't tell people you can't fight while they're being killed. And the reason for the recent conflict is because Palestinians in Jerusalem were being removed from their homes, and their homes were taken over. That's why the rockets were fired. as well as the
yeah,
mosque.
yeah. I saw the mosque. That was pretty disgusting, if I'm honest. Yeah, like that should be a place of worship, like whatever religion you're from or believe in or don't believe in. That's people's like, yeah.
The hardcore religious Zionists, they want to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's on the agenda. Because on top of it, they want to rebuild the third temple so that the Messiah will come. It's a Messianic prophecy. So there's this really crazy element, are very ISIS-like.
What is the third temple?
The third camp?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'm not going to give it to the liberal Zionists. So I'd say the third camp are people who want a one-state solution. That's what I would say.
Okay.
Is it not just? Like, without justice, you can't have peace at the end of the day.
Yeah. I mean,
what moral argument against it? That's what I would like to hear.
Yeah. No, I would love to hear anyone who can actually make a case for that. But I haven't heard anyone like successfully defend it. I mean, the argument that I've heard Barry Weiss give, for example, is that, you know, this has to be somewhere for Jewish people to be safe in after what happened during the Second World War, and that they should be that they need a state in which to feel safe. And I mean, I guess I can understand like their fear in a way.
Like, number one, the idea for a state of Israel wasn't a reaction to World War II. It was way before that. As I told you, 1910, 1920, that was when the first like waves of Zionist illegal immigrants were entering Palestine. I can give you like a graph showing Jewish immigration to Palestine, and it shows that like it started way earlier than World War II. And in fact, who thought this whole thing up? And this can sound like a conspiracy because even saying his name is now deemed conspiratorial. But Lord Rothschild, the Balfour Declaration was written to Lord Rothschild. And what he did was he got Lord Balfour to agree to giving Palestine to Jews if he helps them fund World War I. Like, that was the gambit. And that was even before Britain controlled Palestine. At that time, the whole thing was just Syria. I mean, Syria, when it declared independence in 1920, the Syria that declared independence actually included the entire Levant, Palestine, Jordan, and Lebanon. And that was like broken up by the French and the British. And then the British had it in their mind, even before World War II, that they were already starting like this wave of illegal Jewish immigration. World War II was a catalyst to convince the rest of the, at the time, like the Jewish population thought this is just nuts. Like, I'm not going to leave Europe. I'm comfortable here. My great grandparents were here. I speak the language of this country that I'm in. Why would I want to go to the Middle East? Like, it's hot, it's dry, it doesn't make any logical sense. And so World War II was a catalyst, but really, like, it was the biggest wave of immigration came in the 60s and 70s. It wasn't even after World War II. So, and also, interestingly, like, a lot of the refugees that came to Palestine, to Haifa, some of them were housed by Palestinians, like Gigi Hadid's dad. He became a refugee because his family housed a Jewish family of refugees, and they changed the locks to their door. And then they were like, the other people, their villages were exterminated by Jewish terrorist groups, and they were death marched without shoes, why is that okay? Because of the Holocaust? So do two wrongs make a right?
No.
I don't see the logic in that.
No. I mean, that's often, it's put forward far too often these days. Like the idea, I can't even remember who the quote's from. It's like the only way to deal with past racism is like present and future racism. It's like, what do you mean? Hang on a second. I thought we didn't want that. I've never quite got that kind of attitude. Just for I don't know, posterity here. I've checked out what you said about the Balfour Declaration, and you're right. It says the Balfour Declaration here. This is history.com. So I mean, I feel like this is fairly credible. It says, was a letter written by British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour to Lionel Walter Rothschild, in which he expressed the British government's support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. So yeah, anyone who thinks that was a crazy, wild accusation is wrong. That's true. it's so but like sometimes you have to do these things at these days because people would just be like, oh, that's misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, like now it's come to the point where you can't even say the word Rothschild without someone saying you're a crazy conspiracy theorist. But I mean, this is history, and what I'm trying to say is the idea of stealing Palestinian land and exterminating them existed long before the Holocaust.
Yeah. So the last thing I kind of wanted to ask you about was you'd made a video about the US funding al-Qaeda, and I was just curious about that, whether that was still going on, and what was happening there.
Yeah, so interestingly, as you know, like the CIA had a program of funding militia groups in Syria, and one of the groups, al-Zinki, beheaded a child. This was one of the CIA moderate groups that they confirmed were moderate, like went on camera and they beheaded the kid. So it was very embarrassing at the time, and like that led to as well as the fact that the weapons that they were being given to those groups were ending up in the hands of al-Qaeda because they would just sell them to al-Qaeda. And they were all kind of working in cahoots anyway. So because of that, Trump wasn't, he actually shut down that CIA program. But now what they're trying to do is they're trying to
you don't hear about that very often, do you?
No. What they're trying to do is they're trying to say that al-Qaeda is not actually al-Qaeda, that Jabhat al-Nusra is now reformed. Al-Jolani, the head of al-Qaeda, is really, he's actually ready to work with the Americans now. And the fact of the matter is that they control Idlib, right? They control Idlib province. So there's literally no other options for the Americans other than to work with al-Qaeda. So therefore they have to clean up al-Qaeda's image because they need to fund them. And that's what's happening now. They're cleaning up the image. And there's been evidence that the US military is making contracts with these mercenary groups or like private, contractors to supply weapons in the form of Kalashnikovs and, RPGs, anything from the Soviet era, and just send them over to somewhere. And that place is probably Syria, because the US military is not going to use Kalashnikovs and Soviet era weaponry. Who's going to use it? It's going to be the rebels. So I think once they success, it's going to be very difficult. But PBS interviewed the head of al-Qaeda, and they're really moving in this direction. That once they clean up al-Qaeda's image enough, they will start being open about the fact that they're actually sending them weapons. But they are. It's already happening. The weapons are coming through Turkey, which is NATO, across the border with Syria. At the end of the day, the most important thing for the US is to keep Idlib province under al-Qaeda control. They want that because they want to prevent the Syrian state from having, because Idlib province is like really the northwestmost region of Syria. It's got like forests and rivers and greenery, and we need that because we have 20 million people, and the east side of the country is a desert, but the northeast side of the country is like the perfect place to grow wheat, and 80% of the wheat comes from there, as well as like all of the oil. So the US is occupying that region. So the point is to keep Syria starving and weak. Why? Because of Israel. That's the only reason.
That's interesting. Just to also confirm that you were right about the Trump ending that program, it says here, New York Times, critics in Congress had complained for years about the costs, more than $1 billion over the life of the program, and reports that some CIA supplied weapons that end up in the hands of a rebel group tied to al-Qaeda. And yeah, Trump shut down the program in August of 2017. That had been started by Barack Obama, I think, in 2015, it says here. Oh, yes. 2013, sorry. So again, if anyone thinks that was rubbish, it was the truth. Maram, it's been fantastic. Do you want to tell people where you can, or where people can find your stuff and whatnot, or promote anything you're doing at the moment?
Yes, thank you for this very brave discussion. I'm really I'm worried about you now. No, but just joking. But thank you so much for being open to some of these ideas that are deemed fringe. I hope everybody looks up diligently everything I'm saying, and that is all I could ask for. You can find me on YouTube as Syrian Girl Partisan. And you can find me on Facebook as PartisanGirl. You can find me on Telegram as Syrian Girl Partisan. And you can find me on Twitter. Hopefully, I'll be able to get it back as PartisanGirl as well.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I mean, what are they going to do? Ban me? Probably at some point. They haven't banned me yet, so it's fine. Hopefully, I'll be able to keep going. I like to think that I approach things reasonably enough that they can't be like, you're a nutcase. And I talk to people from literally I try to talk to people from every point of view possible. So I have everyone from pure communists to people who were at the January 6th riot insurrection thing. So I like to think that there's no way anyone can be like, oh, he's just a right wing nutcase. And it's haha, pin me down, please.
No worries. Well, for the record, you pushed back on a lot of my ideas. So if anyone has a problem, just notice that it was me saying all these things. So
yes, exactly.
I look forward to hearing more from you. Maybe as you investigate more, you might be. If you want to hear from me again, I'll be happy to come on.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, thanks very much.
My pleasure.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the podcast. Don't forget our sponsor, ExpressVPN, and my book, Brexit, the Establishment Civil War, can both be found in the links in the description below. And also, please share, and subscribe to this podcast. It's the best way to help us grow. Until next time, thanks for listening. Screw the hedge funds.
You can make as many rules as you want, but if there's no teeth behind them, what's the point?
Well, Citadel is potentially just gone in a few months. It feels like financial institutions, that they are all laughing at us by buying GME. Screw the hedge funds. I will lose my entire investment if it brings them down.
Why on earth, last May, could you buy the entire company for $200 million?
What's been happening on Reddit and in social media and in the marketplace has never been seen before.
I argue that nothing is off the table. There is nothing off the table when dealing with the volumes of money in something as big as the United States stock market.
The hedge funds have clearly underestimated a group of people raised on Friday night World of Warcraft raids.
Dark pools, they're another mechanism to manipulate and cheat. Mainstream journalists don't say these things for a number of reasons. One is their sources are the people that I'm talking about, and so they can't call somebody a crook.
Superstonk and the other communities that have emerged are a hive mind, the likes of which we have never seen before. It's madness and brilliance, insanity and genius all rolled into one. It's very possible that Citadel will be gone in a few months, and not just Citadel, but the entire financial system has the potential to come crashing down. These crooks continue to gamble recklessly with the world economy, and this could be the moment that they finally get their justice.